could leave single mom kids homeless. Pottstown Mercury, dated October 15th of this year.
Without objection, so ordered.
I'll put that on the record, but we're working with Kelly now to see if we can't be helpful. But the point is, she should never have had to go through that anxiety and worry, and maybe to the point where she won't be able to move into that house that she had a chance to move into. So that's what real life is. Real life of trying to complete a mortgage application and moving along to go from an apartment to a home with your 4 children and being stopped because of a shutdown here. And in the case of the earlier letter that I referred to, a daughter talking about her parents, the worry that they have, literally sleepless nights, literally pain and anxiety because of what's happening or not happening here in Washington. So what we hope and what we pray on days like this is that the actions taken will lift some of that anxiety, provide a measure, and maybe it only will be a very small measure of comfort, or we hope in a larger sense for the economy, some degree of stability. And I think once we get past this period and we literally get back to the work that the American people expect us to focus on, which, if I could put it in a soundbite, when I hear from people in Pennsylvania, they say to me, when they're telling me what they hope I would do as one of their representatives, they say, work together to create jobs, or work together to help the middle class, work together to move the economy forward, some variation of that. And that's what we hope to get to. As important as it is to begin the process of talking about and negotiating on a budget for the next year and on the longer-term fiscal questions, it's very important, I believe, for both parties to get back to the focus which we should bring to bear on building a stronger middle class and building a stronger economy. You don't have to go very far or read the paper for many days to find evidence that the middle class has never been more under siege, never been more undermined and weakened over time than the middle class is today. On September the 19th of this year, in the New York Times, there was a graph. I won't put the graph in the record, but I'll just summarize it very briefly. There was a graph of all kinds of data that indicated what's happened in the middle class over the last generation. And the headline over the description of the graphs was "Standing Still," with a big question mark. And the point that it makes is that the middle class is virtually where it was many years ago, if not further behind. And I'm quoting from some of that summary where it says, quote, "The cost of maintaining a middle-class lifestyle," the costs, I should say, plural, have increased. And then in the middle of the page is a graph that talks about the middle 20% of the country, okay? So basically what most would describe as the middle class. And in that 20%, you can tell just from a little more than a generation. This graph goes from 1967 to 2012. The share of total income of that middle 20% of the country has gone from 17.1% to 14.8%, a substantial erosion of income for the middle class. So that's a problem and a challenge that we should work on in the days ahead, in addition to working on our budget. And I'll make one final point about what we should do on the other side of this important work that we're going to do today to complete this agreement and to lift the threat of default and to make sure that we open up the government and move to negotiations. There was on July the 20th of this year, there was a long piece in the New York Times about not just the middle class, but also about other measures of how we're doing as a country. And 2 data points jumped out at me and frankly would outrage anyone reading them. When they listed the top 20 countries that are our peers, and this category was the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the so-called OECD countries. In other words, the 20 countries in the world that are most similar to the United States by by way of economies and to a certain extent by population. So we're compared to our peers. That's the measurement. If you look at the top 20, under two categories, infant mortality and child poverty, the United States of America ranks 17th in both out of 20. So, and 17th being right near the bottom. So instead of being in the top 3 or the top 5 or even the top 10, the United States on child poverty and on infant mortality is number 17 in the world out of 20. So as we move to a focus on the middle class and a focus on job creation strategies and even a focus on budgets and whatever else people want to debate and negotiate about around here, I hope, and I think we're all challenged by the admonition that we cannot lose sight of what's happening to our children. This is the most powerful country in the world. Our economy may not be demonstrating it right now, but we are and we will be. But we can never say that we're doing the job we must do if we're not focused on the needs and the challenges faced by our families and especially the most vulnerable member of any family, a child. Infant mortality and child poverty are two indicators where this country is far, far behind, and we all need to do more on those issues. So, Mr. President, we're happy that we're moving to a resolution of this long nightmare that the country has lived through and these families have lived through. But even on the other side of this, we have some major challenges that should be a summons to our conscience to do something about these issues. And I hope that that our actions and our work can be commensurate with the challenge that's faced by families and especially the challenge faced by our children. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join my wonderful colleague from Pennsylvania in expressing relief and optimism that it finally looks like we are rid of the wasteful and useless government shutdown we have been put through for the past 2 weeks, that it looks like we are rid of the dangerous threat of American default that we have faced for the last few days, and let us hope together that we are also rid of the malicious spirit that led us down this evil path in the first place. A colleague the other day on the Senate floor used the analogy of a fire in an airplane's cockpit, distracting the pilots from flying the aircraft where it needed to go as they had to put out the fire. Well, that's kind of what we've been through this past 2 weeks. Let me hope that we will have no more of our own countrymen lighting fires in the cockpit just in order to try to get their way. We need, as a nation, to get our heads up, to fly the plane, and to ready ourselves for weather ahead. The last 2 weeks have been wasted in this useless artificial crisis, and it has distracted us from real crises, real problems, undeniable problems, things that the Speaker of the House can't make go away by finally allowing a vote, but that are really going to require us to work together to solve them. None is more significant to our children than what our carbon pollution is doing to Earth's atmosphere and oceans. It is not enough just to put out the fire in the cockpit. We have to wake up to the real problems ahead and around us. I recently saw, I know that the presiding officer from Ohio is a keen enthusiast and student of history, and I recently saw a part of the Dust Bowl, which is Ken Burns' documentary series on that calamity. The Dust Bowl calamity was an economic disaster and a human disaster, but it was also described in this show as having been an economic disaster and a human disaster because it was first and foremost an environmental disaster. Indeed, one of the 2 or 3 most devastating environmental disasters in the United States. The Dust Bowl happened, creating such disaster for so many good, hard-working families because, simply put, we messed with Mother Nature. To plant wheat, we tore up the deep-rooted buffalo grass that had protected the prairies for generations. We ignored that there were cycles of drought that were the Great Plains' history, and the result was tragedy and destruction. There are obvious parallels from the Dust Bowl experience to where we are now on carbon pollution. Most obviously, lesson 1, you mess with Mother Nature at your peril. And are we ever messing with Mother Nature? We just broke through 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. After at least 800,000 years, which, by the way, is longer than Homo sapiens has been a species, at least 800,000 years, in the range between 170 and 300. Our whole species has come to the success that we have seen on this planet in a safe window of 170 to 300 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we have now broken out of it. The entire history of our species from 170 to 300, and we have now broken out of it. And it's not just 400, it's 400 and climbing. Move from our atmosphere to our oceans. Our oceans are acidifying at the fastest rate ever recorded. You have to go millions of years back into the geologic record to find anything comparable. And when you go there, what else you find? When you look back to those points in the ancient geologic record, it isn't pretty. In fact, it's downright ominous. The second lesson is that the cause of such a calamity can be a perfectly normal activity, just at the wrong scale. Look at the Dust Bowl. There's nothing wrong with plowing. Plowing the earth is probably the single most valuable thing humankind has ever learned to do. Plowing is essential to farming, and yet it was that ordinary activity, plowing, which brought on the Dust Bowl and the vast human tragedy that ensued because it was at the wrong scale. Similarly, there's nothing inherently wrong with burning fossil fuels. We do it driving to the market. We call it up when we flip the light switch on. And yet, burning fossil fuels at too great a scale is leading us to the brink of a new disaster. What changes, what makes it no longer perfectly normal and okay, is when you know what the consequences are of the scale of your activity. Once you know the consequences that you're causing, that activity is no longer so benign, and responsibility cannot be so easily shrugged off. If only the farmers at their plows had listened to the warnings of the cattlemen and the Native Americans and not put every corner of every farm to the plow. There's a third parallel, which is that there's a lot of lying done when there's money to be made. In the Dust Bowl, land dealers and speculators told farm families that plowing the prairies would make more rain fall. Rain follows the plow, they were told. They had nothing to worry about. And the land speculators sold, and they sold, and they sold, and they sold a pack of lies. The race to plow created more speculators and more hucksters and more lies. Today, we have the deniers. a sophisticated, well-honed apparatus of institutions and strategies designed to spread lies, designed to sow doubt, designed to delay action. Today it's done at a scale that makes the Dust Bowl hucksters look like piddling amateurs. It's funded by giant corporations like ExxonMobil and Koch Industries. It uses the slickest Madison Avenue strategies. It maintains a stable of pet scientists willing to be trotted out and recite from the polluter's playbook. It operates through a network of false front organizations designed to look more independent and credible than their funders are and designed to hide the money flow. When history looks back and this story is fully told, I believe this apparatus of lies will take its place beside great American scandals like Teapot Dome and Watergate. But for now, it churns merrily on its way, cranking out the propaganda. Regrettably, this apparatus has captured large segments of the Republican Party and silenced others. The polluters have maneuvered the question of carbon pollution right into the middle of the Republican Party's culture wars. The fossil fuel industry must be really chortling at having pulled off that feat. But it does not bode well for the Republican Party. Lies are ultimately revealed. The choice to make bedfellows of the polluters will soon enough be very damaging to the Republican Party. For the polluters, well, they've played the Republican Party for suckers and they'll grin all the way to the bank. They won't care. The last parallel is the lesson that when you are messing big time with Mother Nature, things can go precipitously wrong. Mother Nature can turn on you very suddenly. Wheat farming on the plains was a bonanza with bumper crops year after year. Families that had never owned land, that never before had a place to call their own, saw golden futures as far as the eye could see as the wheat ripened. And within just a few years, the devastation was complete, and families' dreams were shattered. The Dust Bowl came on fast. There's a phrase, a fool's paradise. It's called a fool's paradise because it looks like paradise for a while if you don't look ahead and take the precautions that will protect that paradise and fend off calamity. Not looking ahead is what gets you to the fool part. Young people are looking ahead. Voters under 35, by a ratio of 66 to 27, more than 2 to 1, say climate change is a problem we need to address. 66 to 27. And get this, when asked about climate deniers, 74% of independent young voters said that they would describe climate deniers as ignorant, out of touch, or crazy. Ignorant, out of touch, or crazy. For Republican young voters, voters under 35, it's 53%. 53% of self-identified Republican voters under the age of 35 identify climate deniers as ignorant, out of touch, or crazy. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to conclude in 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
So I ask my Republican friends, how is climate denial a winning strategy when 53% of your own young voters think it's ignorant, out of touch, or crazy? How is that looking ahead? We in Congress get elected to look ahead. We don't get elected to put our heads in the sand. We certainly don't get elected to parrot the lies of the special interests. Well, we're not looking ahead. We're sound asleep here in Congress. We're having a snooze while nature's alarms are ringing all around us. It is time for Congress to wake up. We have a duty here. We need to wake up to our duty. I thank the presiding officer. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Florida is recognized.
Mr. President, it now appears that at some point this evening we will reach the end of the latest Washington manufactured crisis of the month. But unfortunately, the real crisis facing our country remains. And that real crisis is the growing sense among our people that we are losing the American dream. Why do people feel this way? Because more than 4 million Americans have been out of work for 6 months or more. Because millions more find themselves stuck with jobs that do not pay enough for them to live the way they used to. And while their paychecks aren't growing, their bills are. Ask the young couples and the single parents how much they're spending every month to provide child care for their children. Ask the students, the young Americans who are stuck with thousands of dollars in student loans that they're now struggling to pay. This is the real crisis facing America, that our status as a land of opportunity seems to be eroding, and that so many of our political leaders seem oblivious to this. And now, as we emerge from this latest standoff, we have done nothing to address it. There were two issues at play in the showdown. The press coverage mixes them together, but there are two distinct and separate issues, and they should be examined that way. It started with Obamacare, a law that was sold to people as something that would help them get affordable health insurance. But that is not what it's going to be. We've all heard the news of what a fiasco the rollout of the exchanges has been. But as bad as the rollout of the exchanges and the website has been, we need to realize that that was supposed to be the easy part. The most difficult and disruptive parts of that law are yet to come. In the months to come, a new insurance fee, a new tax on hard-working Americans will be added to insurance policies. People will be required to give up existing coverage that they are happy with if it doesn't meet the standards created by Obamacare. And if they don't buy the insurance, they eventually will have to pay a tax that goes up to either $695 a year or 2.5% of your income. Employers with more than 50 full-time employees will be required to offer a certain type of coverage to their employees. So many of them are moving people to part-time work. And full-time, by the way, is no longer defined as 40 hours. It's now 30 hours. So many employers are moving employees to under 30 hours a week. Today, for many Americans, Obamacare is just a website that doesn't work. But in the months to come, this law is going to hurt millions of people. It's going to cost them hours at work and maybe even their job. It's going to cost them the insurance that they have now and are happy with. It's going to force them to leave their existing doctor, and it's going to raise rates for people who buy insurance for themselves. What do we tell these people that are being hurt by this law? To deal with it because it's the law of the land? Is it not our job to fight for them? Is it not our job to be their voice, to protect them from the harmful effects of this law? And that's why I continue to believe that we should not waste a single penny more of taxpayer money on this damaging law. One of the most important powers and responsibilities that we have as members of Congress is the power of the purse. It's under our Constitution. It gives the Congress the power to decide what to spend money on and what not to spend money on from the taxpayer. Now, I know of no one in my party who supported shutting down the government. On the contrary, we argued that we should fund the entire government except for one thing, Obamacare. In fact, the House of Representatives passed a law that did just that. But the Democrats took the position that either we fund Obamacare or we fund nothing at all. They took the position that funding Obamacare was more important than funding the government. And they were willing to put our country through this government shutdown just to save their pet project. Within days of this showdown, by the way, a second issue was added to it, the federal debt limit. Now, the press portrays the debt limit as simply a law that allows us to pay our bills. And therefore, they fall for the argument that failing to raise the debt limit means or equals a default on our debt. But the debt limit is a lot more than just simply permission to pay our bills. Every year, our government is spending more money than it takes in, a lot more money than it takes in. And as the years go by, that annual deficit adds up to what we call the national debt. And it's growing at an alarming rate. The debt limit is a law that limits the amount of money the government can have as debt at any single time. But we depend on borrowed money to pay our bills. And so if we don't raise it again, eventually we will not have enough money to pay all of our bills. That should scare us. Reaching the debt limit is like when the bank calls on you to collect on the monthly mortgage payment. If you don't pay them, your home is going to be taken away, your credit's going to be ruined, and your ability to borrow money in the future is going to be hurt. But what if, because you don't make enough money, the only way you can pay your mortgage is by using your credit card? You can't keep doing that forever. And so when the bank calls, you pay the bill, but you also figure out what other expenses to cut so you don't have to keep using your credit card to pay the mortgage. That's what real people in the real world would do. But that's not what we're being asked to do here. They're asking us to just pay the bill and keep using the credit card and let tomorrow worry about tomorrow. We can't keep doing that forever, because at some point even the credit card is going to stop working. Yet that's what's happened here again. And so the debt will keep growing, and with each passing year we will get closer to the day that we face a real debt crisis. A real debt crisis. Not one caused because the Congress can't pass a bill, but one caused because no one will lend us money anymore. And that's how we arrived at the point we find ourselves at today. We have a president and a majority in the Senate that would rather face a default before seriously dealing with the debt. We have a president and a majority in this Senate that would rather shut down the government before they would shut down Obamacare or even make any meaningful changes to it. So tonight, the government will be reopened and the debt limit will be lifted, but our real problems are still here. And in the months and years to come, they are only going to get bigger and harder to solve. And for those of us who realize this, who clearly understand that the direction we are headed threatens the American dream and all the things that make our country special, this is the time to reflect on the way forward. Because if we do not figure out how to change course around here, if we do not figure out the way to change this course our nation is on, we will forever be known as the generation that ushered in America's decline. And history's not going to distinguish between Republicans and Democrats. It will judge us all harshly for our failure to act. To avoid this fate, we must once and for all begin to address the national debt. Not with accounting gimmicks, but with real and measurable steps. It doesn't have to be solved in one sweeping measure, but we must begin the work of moving towards a sustainable level of spending. This will take time, because we're still saddled by too many leaders unwilling to address the issue in a meaningful way. So let's do what we can while they're still here. And at the same time, let's work to replace these irresponsible leaders on the left with leaders who will finally step up and save our nation from the real debt crisis that awaits us. As for Obamacare, it too will be harshly judged by history. And that's why I'm personally so disappointed that we were not able to achieve any meaningful changes to it. But this fight is not over. It's really only just begun. For in the months to come, millions of Americans will begin to confront the costs and the consequences of this law. It will be the reason why they're now working part-time. It will be the reason why they lost the insurance they used to have. It will be the reason why they can't see the doctor they've been seeing for all these years. It will be the reason why their insurance premiums have gone through the roof. We've been warning people about this for years, and we've done everything we can to keep this harm from reaching our people. But now Obamacare is going to start hurting real people in real ways, and when it does, there is going to be a mad scramble in this town to fix it or get rid of it. This has happened before. In June of 1988, Congress passed a bill called the Medicare Catastrophic Coverage Act. It promised new medical benefits for the elderly, a cap on hospital and doctor bills, provided prescription medicine. And then the true cost of the program began to reach the American people. And as seniors began to learn the true cost of this new program, it fueled a revolt. Now, at first, the politicians minimized it. They minimized the protest. They refused to make any changes to it. But before long, the onslaught of calls and mail was so much that it became impossible to ignore. And before long, Congress was in full retreat, and by 1989, it was fully replaced. Now, for Obamacare, that day of reckoning is also coming. You know, over the last few months, I've been startled by the number of people who have told me that they're ready to give up. They're ready to give up on the idea that we can make a difference. They're ready to give up on the idea that things will ever get better. But we cannot give up on America. And we cannot give up on the American dream. We cannot give up because where are we going to go? If this country declines, if we lose what makes it special, what's going to replace it? And so no matter how long it takes, no matter how many disappointments lie ahead, we must never give up. And we must never accept that this way of life today is the new normal. As for those around the world who look at all these events of the last few days and believe that it's evidence that our best days are behind us, you don't understand our people. Our politics does not define our country. We are a unique people, a collection of men and women with sharply different views, with different backgrounds and beliefs. We share a free society, and everyone has a right to express their views, to argue and to battle and to debate. Sometimes our differences bring us to points of great conflict, when the nation appears on the verge of being ripped apart at the seams. But yet for over 200 years we have been held together, because while we're divided on many things, we are united by a powerful and timeless idea. Before I describe that idea, I'd like unanimous consent for one additional minute to conclude.
Without objection, so ordered.
For over 200 years, we've been held together because we're united by a powerful and timeless idea. The idea that every single person has the God-given right to determine the course of their own life. The God-given right to go as far as our talent and our work will take us. And so we argue about the best way to achieve that. And we have a tendency to put off difficult decisions until we absolutely have to make them. But we have faced greater tests before. We have not always rushed to meet the challenge, but in the end we have never failed to do so. And let there be no doubt, we will do so again. The day is coming when our people will realize that the time has arrived once again to confront the challenges before us. The day is coming when our people will do what must be done to keep the American dream alive. I know it's hard to see right now, but we are one day closer to the moment when Americans will do what we have always done. We will confront and solve the challenges of our time, and we will make any sacrifice and undertake any task to make sure that we leave for our children what the Americans of yesterday left for us, the single greatest nation in the history of the world. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, Senior Senator from Mississippi is recognized.
Mr. President, I'm optimistic that soon we will be able to enact legislation to reopen our government and affirm the world's long-standing confidence in our financial stability and system of democracy. The current situation is an unfortunate byproduct of our sometimes discordant form of government, which at this time happens to be divided between our two parties. Despite the challenges of recent weeks, I hope this experience demonstrates to the Senate, to the other body, and to the administration that the nation is best served when we work together. If we allow our current hardships to pass on, only to immediately entrench and get ready for the next crisis, we will be wasting an opportunity to extract a positive outcome from these last difficult weeks. Under the rules of the Senate, individual senators are provided with significant power to shape the activity of this body. That's the way the Senate was designed to operate, and it has served this body and the country well. Recognizing that the rights entrusted to each of us can be powerful, we must be judicious in their application. We must always remember that each of us was elected by the people. If we work in cooperation and even opposition with a sense of realism and respect for ourselves and our institution, I believe this body can function effectively. In getting past our current fiscal stalemates, I hope that we can next achieve a long-term agreement that we will reduce our debt through structural changes to government spending. As a part of that process, we must talk seriously about the President's health care law, its serious flaws, and its impact on families and businesses. I've consistently opposed this law, and one of my goals is seeing that it is repealed, delayed, or made voluntary. Achieving that goal may take longer than we would prefer because we are in the minority. But the law's declining popularity should give senators from both parties reason to reevaluate it. As part of a sustainable budget plan, I hope we can reach a long-term agreement on a farm bill to provide producers and consumers with certainty and to preserve the security Americans enjoy by our ability to generate independently food and fiber for ourselves and for the world. The farm bill this body adopted earlier this year would help accomplish those goals and save $23 billion over the next 5 years. If we can achieve a responsible budget agreement for fiscal year 2014 and beyond, I'm confident the Appropriations Committee can produce bipartisan bills to fund the government in a responsible manner. I hope all members have begun to recognize that our inability to act on individual appropriations bills has reduced each senator's opportunity to help shape federal programs and has eliminated a principal means of overseeing the executive branch. The Appropriations Committee has long been able to produce bills that reflect input from all members, reflecting their different needs and their different priorities. The committee has continued to do so since passage of the Budget Control Act, which has had the effect of reducing spending by more than $2 trillion from discretionary accounts over the past 10 years. It is the only significant deficit reduction legislation enacted in recent memory. I supported that act, as did a majority of senators on both sides of the aisle. Now we've given ourselves another opportunity to make broader budget reforms. It will be a benefit to the legislative branch and the people who elected us if we can establish a budget framework that will enable us to deal in a more transparent manner with all legislation, including appropriations bills and reform measures to simplify our tax code. Mr. President, I'm pleased that we seem close to resolving the current impasse, and I hope that over the coming weeks we can devote ourselves to thoughtful and productive deliberations on the budget. It is important that we act to restore the confidence of the American people in the United States Senate. We must take real steps to strengthen our nation's fiscal foundation so that our economy can grow and American families and businesses can prosper. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate is expected to vote on the Senate agreement to reopen the government and raise the nation's borrowing limit today, and if it passes, it'll go to the House for a vote tonight. House Speaker John Boehner released a statement about the deal. A part of it reads, "The House has fought with everything it has to convince the President of the United States to engage in bipartisan negotiations aimed at addressing our country's debt and providing fairness for the American people under Obamacare. That fight will continue. But blocking the bipartisan agreement reached today by members of the Senate will not be a tactic for us. In addition to the risk of default, doing so would open the door for the Democratic majority in Washington to raise taxes again on the American people and undo the spending caps in the 2011 Budget Control Act without replacing them with better spending cuts." That from House Speaker John Boehner. CQ Roll Call writes that under the deal, a conference would be created to negotiate a fiscal 2014 budget agreement.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, there's been a lot of debate on the floor of the Senate about Obamacare. It's the Affordable Care Act. It passed about 3.5 years ago. Why did we do this? Why did we enact this law? It wasn't easy, and it took months to achieve it. The goal was quite simple. We wanted to make sure that about 40 to 50 million uninsured Americans would have a chance to have health insurance. And I can tell you that's a worthy goal, because even uninsured people get sick, and if you don't have health insurance and you get sick and show up at the hospital, they will take care of you. But then when you can't pay the bill, they transfer that obligation to everyone else. It's estimated we spend about $1,000 a year in health insurance premiums to cover the care of uninsured people. So not only do these people without insurance live without the peace of mind of having protection when they get sick, the rest of us with health insurance pay for it. That's not right. In a society like ours, we should accept responsibility to not only have health insurance, but to make it available for everyone. And when we took a look at the health insurance market, here's what we found. There were parts of health insurance that were just plain wrong. Imagine someone in your family has a pre-existing condition. It's not uncommon. Think of the possibilities. Only a few that come to mind. Asthma, diabetes, cancer survivor, women. It turned out that if you had things like that in your background, you could be discriminated against and people wouldn't sell you health insurance. Obamacare eliminated that discrimination based on pre-existing conditions. When the Republicans come to the floor and say they want to repeal Obamacare, they are repealing that protection for families that have a child or a member of the family with a pre-existing condition. That's what they're saying. Obamacare also said that if you have a limit on your policy of how much it will pay in any given year, that is stricken. Why would we do that? Because you never know. Tomorrow morning, a doctor's diagnosis or an accident could result in hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical bills that you couldn't pay because there was a limit on your protection. That limitation was stricken by Obamacare. Those who want to eliminate Obamacare would allow the insurance companies to put those restrictions in again. And what about parents with children, fresh out of college looking for a job? Some of them are lucky. They'll get a job with health care benefits. Some not so lucky. Maybe a job without any benefits. Maybe no job. So what we did in Obamacare is say, keep those kids, your sons and daughters, on your family health insurance plan up to age 26. Those who want to eliminate Obamacare, eliminate that opportunity for American families to give their kids health care protection while they're looking for a job. We also basically said that senior citizens under Medicare shouldn't pay out of pocket over $1,000 a year for their prescription drugs. The so-called donut hole, we close it. Eventually, they won't be paying out of pocket. We're reducing the financial obligation of seniors to reach into savings accounts for the medicine they need to stay strong, healthy, and independent. Those who want to abolish Obamacare, and we've heard it, starting with the junior senator from Texas just a minute or two ago, from the senator from Florida, on the Republican side of the aisle, are basically saying to seniors, pay more out of pocket for prescription drugs. I don't think that's right. What we are offering with insurance exchanges across America now in 50 states is the same opportunity for uninsured people that members of Congress have today. You see, members of Congress are under the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program, covers 8 million federal employees and their families. And that means we have an open enrollment period every year, and we can choose, my wife and I choose, from 9 different policies in the state of Illinois. We take the one we want, and we've got good coverage. It's not the most expensive or the best, but it's good coverage. And we get to shop. It's hard for many members of Congress to remember or believe that most Americans never have that luxury. They can't shop for health insurance. Some of them are denied any health insurance. Some work for an employer who says take it or leave it, and some just can't afford to buy anything. The insurance exchanges offer the opportunity for the 40 to 50 million uninsured and those buying in the private insurance market to go shopping for the best policy for themselves and their families. Competition. Shopping in a marketplace. That's what Americans are looking for, and that's what the Republicans want to close down. They want to close that down. And so you say, well, obviously, then there's the Republican plan when it comes to health insurance. The Republican plan for health insurance, this blank page of paper. They have no plan. They have no ideas. They're just opposed to Obamacare. And that's why they initially shut down this government. They wanted to defund Obamacare. An interesting thing, 2 interesting things happened after they made that announcement. The marketplaces came online and ran into serious problems. They're currently restructuring them because the overwhelming response to these insurance marketplaces they weren't prepared for. I'm sorry they weren't. I don't know who's responsible for it, but we need to know. In the meantime, we're putting the insurance marketplaces up and running. The second thing that happened after the Republicans announced they wanted to defund Obamacare and therefore we're going to shut down the government, it turns out that as the marketplaces went online, the popularity of Obamacare increased. People across America said, finally, this is a good idea. Those of us who have access to the marketplace can finally go shopping for health insurance. So exactly the opposite of what the Republicans thought would happen, happened. The American people are open and receptive more to the idea of going to these marketplaces if they don't have health insurance or they have health insurance they can't afford. The health insurance marketplace is open for business, and people across America, across the nation, have started shopping for it. Many people have waited for years, even decades. I came to the floor when the junior senator from Texas was holding the floor for 21 hours and asked him to consider the case of a young, I call her young, lady that I met in Illinois named Judy. She's a housekeeper at a motel that I stay in Southern Illinois. She's in her early 60s. She's worked hard every day of her life, and she's never had health insurance one day in her life. Not one day. And she has diabetes now, and she's worried. We got some local doctors to see her and give her some recommendations and try to help her, but she's never had health insurance. And I asked Senator Cruz from Texas, what are we going to do with Judy? If she doesn't have this marketplace where she can go for health insurance for the first time in her life, what's going to happen to her? And he said to me, she needs to get a better job. A better job. Well, it's easy for us to say that, but this poor woman has worked hard all her life. There isn't a lazy bone in her body. She's doing the very best she can. And senators ought to realize that some people, even working as hard as they can, can't get health insurance unless Obamacare goes through. 16 states and the District of Columbia have created their own exchanges. Those state-operated exchanges have opened fairly smoothly. California had 7,700 applications for health insurance the first day. Now, Kentucky is a great success story. More than 5,000 people or families had enrolled for health care and 10,000 completed applications on the first day. Kentucky's a great success story for Obamacare. I understand that number is closer to 10,000 now who've enrolled for health care. Think about that. 10,000 families in the state of Kentucky now have a chance for health care. Those who want to defund it and close it down are closing down their opportunity to have protection for their families. New Mexico is partnering with the federal government for individual and family coverage, but it's operating the SHOP exchange, which allows small businesses to find group overage coverage for their employees. In the first couple days, 428 different employers in New Mexico had signed up for coverage. They got a better deal in the competitive marketplace than they could find in the private sector beforehand. And the Republicans want to shut down that opportunity for these businesses. It doesn't make sense. The federal government is managing the marketplace in 34 states, including my home state of Illinois. And by Friday of the first week of last week, there have been 8.6 million unique visitors to the federal exchange websites. What we're finding across America is people have been waiting for this chance. I had a lawyer who contacted the insurance exchanges and found out that for his business, a small business, it cut the premiums that they're going to pay annually by 1/3. 6 out of every 10 people who sign up for health insurance under the Obamacare insurance exchanges will pay less than $100 a month in premium. Less than many of them are paying for cable TV. They will have health insurance coverage they can afford. So when the other side starts talking about closing down Obamacare and can't come up with any replacement whatsoever, I think we ought to stop and ask whether or not that's in the best interest of a better America. If you've ever lived in your life with a serious illness in your family and no health insurance, you'll never, ever forget it. I've been there. You'll never, ever forget it. We ought to offer every American family a chance for affordable, quality health insurance for the first time in their lives. The second issue which relates to this, and I find hard to believe, is after defunding Obamacare to close down the government was ended, they started on a new approach. And that was Senator Vitter of Louisiana's amendment, which would restrict, at least in terms of cost, the availability of health insurance for some federal employees who work here on Capitol Hill and members of Congress. I think that's totally unfair, and it troubles me that the Republicans have gone from defunding Obamacare to defunding the health insurance of their own staff and employees. These are hardworking people. My office, and I'll bet they are in every Senate and House office. They stay late, they answer the phones and try to help people who are struggling with red tape. They're there when a family is facing difficulties and can't afford a lawyer. Our people try to help them out with government agencies as best they can. They answer the phones, they answer the email, and now the notion that we are somehow going to limit or restrict their health insurance is just absolutely unacceptable and unfair. These people deserve good health insurance as every American does. And when Senator Vitter comes to the floor with his amendment, which would dramatically increase the cost of their health insurance, it's just fundamentally unfair. It is mean. It is small. It is beneath our dignity. We ought to stand behind our employees whom we hire to represent us across the United States of America. And if we do, we'll defeat this Vitter amendment if it ever comes back for consideration. So, Mr. President, I think that Obamacare is started. Oh, there's been some bumps in the road, that's for sure. But now that we have these marketplaces open, people are going to see what the opportunities are. And as most people know, members of Congress and many of their staff members are going to be covered by the same insurance as everyone's buying in the insurance marketplace. Not all congressional staff members are involved, but many will be. Members of Congress will all be directed to the insurance exchange if that's what they choose to buy for their families. I'm prepared to do that. I think it'll be quality health insurance, which is what every American deserves. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Durbin for his speech, the Assistant Majority Leader. And after one of the privileges of this job, as the senator from Connecticut knows, the senior senator from Connecticut, is the privilege and the the learning experience, if you will, of sitting in the presiding officer's chair and listening to senators speak. And we hear a whole range of talks and a whole range of discussions and a whole range of talents in this body. And sometimes you hear senators with great charisma delivering very impressive political speeches and appealing to patriotism, and other times you hear senators who just focus on the substance and the importance in bringing us down to earth about what really matters here. And Senator Durbin's speech was exactly that about what this health care law means. It means that we can talk about repeal of Obamacare, and that sounds good to crowds back home, to some crowds back home. But when you think of the tens of millions of Americans that will have health insurance in Connecticut and Ohio and Illinois and all over this state, through Medicaid, through joining the exchanges, many of them, so many of them have full-time jobs and have never had insurance. I spoke to a woman in Youngstown one day who told me, she was speaking actually at a town hall, and she said, I'm 63 years old, I work 2 jobs, I've never had insurance. This was before we passed Obamacare. She said, I just want to stay alive for the next year and a half so that I can be on Medicare and have insurance. Imagine that your goal in life is to stay alive so you can have health insurance. And this new law that beginning to take effect when people can sign up October 1st, 3 weeks ago, means tens of millions of people like her will have insurance. It may be Medicaid, it may be the exchanges, it will mean some financial assistance. It will mean that $1,000 tax that Senator Durbin talked about, the $1,000 that all of us with insurance pay as a result of those who go to this hospital and can't afford to pay and get treatment, get care, and somebody's got to pay for it. It's spread around to those with insurance. It means, in my state, about 100,000 people that are in their late teens and 20s that have signed up for their parents' health insurance or are able to sign on to their parents' health plan. It means close to 1 million seniors in Ohio have already gotten preventive care, osteoporosis testing, diabetes, whatever, preventive treatment at no cost, no co-pays, no deductibles. It means all of that. It means more of your premium dollar will go to health care, not to executive salaries, not to marketing, not to insurance company profits. All of that is good news. And while they may not sound as exciting speaking to a Lincoln Day dinner or to a political rally with people holding Confederate flags, we do know what it's going to mean to millions of Americans that may not be going to those rallies, but that have worked hard all their lives and are rewarded for it. Mr. President, just a couple of comments today, how important the news is today. We can finally reopen the government. America's going to honor its debts, pay its bills as we have every day, every week, every month, every year for more than 2 centuries. We're finally going to do the right thing. What that means for people from Gallipolis to Chillicothe to Toledo to all over my state is good news. It means that after this is done, after this vote tonight in the Senate, and I hope tonight in the House of Representatives, the President signs this law to pay our bills and reopen the government. It means we need to focus on what matters in this country. And what matters in this country is jobs, and that means investing in infrastructure, whether that infrastructure is Sinclair Community College in Dayton or Owens Community College in Toledo, whether that infrastructure is a water and sewer system in Napoleon or Bowling Green, whether that infrastructure is a health care clinic in Zanesville or a whole host of things that matter long-term to the future of this country. I was speaking to Senator Coons from Delaware earlier today about the importance of manufacturing, and we are working with a number of our colleagues on bipartisan legislation on focusing on infrastructure, focusing on manufacturing. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, this country, something like 25% of these numbers aren't quite precise, estimated about 25% of our GDP was manufacturing. Manufacturing was about 25% of our GDP. Financial services was less than 15% of our GDP. That's reversed in this country now, and we know what it means to cities like Springfield and Mansfield and Lima in my state, where manufacturing jobs have gone shut down far too often. Those jobs have gone overseas. We still give tax breaks in this country, believe it or not, to companies that outsource, that shut down and move overseas. So a company that shuts down in Ravenna or shuts down in Portsmouth and moves to Wuhan or Xi'an, China, they get tax incentives to do that. That's got to stop. That's one of the things we ought to be working on. But we can have bipartisan support on a whole host of legislation, of bills that I've been working on with Senator Blunt and Senator Collins and Senator Graham and Senator Sessions and Senator Burr to deal with the issue of the Chinese gaming the currency system. That will mean literally hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country that can return or that would not be lost because they're gaming the currency system. On job training, the so-called Sectors Act that will match up skills locally determined by workforce investment boards and community colleges and local businesses and local labor unions with the needs of those businesses, match up the job skills with the needs of those businesses. And last, with Senator Blunt, I'm working on a national network manufacturing proposal that will help companies and universities and technology come together in a way that can spur industries regionally in this country. We know that, for instance, glass in Toledo, the fact that Toledo's been largely, for decades, been a major glass manufacturing center, not just provided a lot of jobs in a variety of different kinds of glass, everything from plate glass to windshields to drinking glasses, but it also evolved into a job-creating industry of solar panels. And so we know how that can work, and this would be a partnership that Senator Blunt and I are working on, and others, with the administration on how, in fact, we can help with manufacturing and continue to lead the world the way that we have for the presiding officers in my entire lifetime. So we know what we got to do today to pay our bills and reopen the government. We know what we need to do in the weeks and months ahead. I look forward to working on those issues with my colleagues. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.